So let's jump in. You heard the talk track. It's all about this idea of an unsinkable experience. And before we get to that, just a little bit about me. I was the CMO for a long time of a company called Uberflip. I'm one of the founders, so I haven't left there. I love it there. Now I'm out on the road doing a lot of this, talking to our customers, talking to our community. And often I'm out there talking about content. But today I'm going to talk about this word experience and really what it means in a big way around guiding a customer journey. So let's dig in. Now, as you see this slide, I know you've probably had a lot of content talks over the last few days. You're probably like, oh shit, another Netflix talk. I promise you this is not another talk about Netflix and analogies about Netflix in any way. So you can stay for the next hour. That said, I do need to start with this screen cap from my own Netflix. And the reason for that is there's an image there and there's a show that used to keep me up at night. And still these days, every once in a while, this one, Bloodline. You ever watch the show? Anyone ever watch the show? All right. It was the worst show to watch before you go to sleep. Don't watch these types of shows before bed. They don't help you get into bed mode. Neither do Leaf games from last night. But there's something about this image though that is so eerie to me and continues to repeat on me in so many ways, because what I'm going to talk to you about today is a true story that reflects that so much. It's a story from a trip that I had to Costa Rica just a few years ago with my family and with my kids. And this was the outcome. This was my actual boat that I was on in the middle of the ocean. A little bit of a spoiler, okay? We survived, right? But you're probably looking at this and saying, oh my God, this must have been the worst experience of your life. You probably look back on it. You probably never want to return to Costa Rica. Actually, not quite. For me, actually, believe it or not, this is what I often now call, and what my kids call, I'll tell you about them and their involvement, an unsinkable experience. We couldn't be sunk despite everything that happened, everything that was thrown against us over a few hours. Now, as I mentioned, as much as unsinkable, the boat did sink. After the big explosion, I'll get to that, I'll walk you through. The boat did sink, but we did not. As I said, we survived this. And now I get to be up here and tell you that story. Not only do I go around and tell that story, my kids tell this story like there's no tomorrow. This was my son at the time. He would have been about 7 years old. All right. And he went and he had a journal because we were on vacation. So he had to go back to school and journal. And I love the innocence of how he walked away from this. If you can read the whole thing, great. If not, just these words here. I learned that I am so brave. Right? I love that. And just as he went and journaled, I went and journaled in my own way. My journal's on LinkedIn. So that's where I go and share my thoughts. And in the moment, this was literally just days after this experience, I went and I talked about how well those around us responded, how well we were embraced by everyone around us. And the post, aside from the video that you'll see shortly, that went viral in many ways, was all about customer experience. So let's jump into the experience itself. And I'm going to help you understand everything we can learn from this. Okay, so as you can see, it was going to be an awesome day. It was going to be an amazing day. This is me, my family. It was 5 of us in my crew. I've got 3 kids. You'll meet them all as we go through this story. And it was my sister-in-law and her 3 kids and her husband. So we had 10 of us. And we just basically rented this boat, not this boat. This boat was a little dinky boat, which my wife was actually much more nervous to go on than the eventual boat, because the eventual boat, was really reassuring. But I do want to highlight this guy. His name's Yuri. And Yuri ends up being a major character in this story. But as you can see, he's your average Costa Rican. Anyone here ever been to Costa Rica? Raise your hand. All right. So you know the term tica? All right. So Yuri's a tico. He's just like a local chill guy, part of the community, nothing fancy. This wasn't some fancy tour. This was our boat. And again, as I said, this was going to be this amazing day where we went out to sea. And as we were going out, Yuri all of a sudden stops about 100 yards or so from shore and says, there's some turtles here. We're going to go snorkeling. So everyone get ready. And as we're doing so, I'm standing at the back of the boat and my sister-in-law says, Randy, I think there's a little bit of smoke coming at your feet. She's like, is it warm? And I said, no, I didn't realize it. And I looked down and I start to see this little bit of black smoke. Now, that little bit of black smoke very quickly turned into a lot of black smoke. This is actual video footage as we were on the boat. Now, you already saw the boat exploded, sunk to the bottom. The phones didn't make it, but somehow my brother-in-law's phone captured this just before, and the video uploaded to the cloud before all of our phones did not make it through this trip. Anyways, as you go through this is happening in real time. This is happening so quick where we are having to make these split decision moments of what is going to be next. And you'll hear here in just a moment. All right?
Trust me. Try and you're fun. Try everything. Yeah, no choice. It's about shit going down.
It's about this ship going down. And like all of us are hearing this, but I'm like, we're just going to jump off and we're going to jump back on. Don't worry, guys. It's all good. Leave your shit on the boat. It'll all be good, right? At this point, I didn't realize the drama that would come from this moment, including, if you listen closely here, this song was playing. It has become a dramatic song for all of us for more reasons than it is for you. That Uptown Funk song, just kind of like every time it goes, I cringe. It just creates a very uncomfortable situation. Now, as I said, we were about 100 yards from shore. We had to swim about 50 yards until we hit what we first thought was maybe shore, even though we weren't really sure. But we actually hit this, and this is coral. So coral is beautiful when you're swimming in the ocean and you're kind of dodging it and all these things. There is nothing worse than walking on coral. When you've told your kids, don't worry, leave your shoes in the boat. You don't want to ruin them, right? So we're now approaching shore. There's about 50 yards of this coral. This is an actual photo of the coral itself. Do you know what this is? Anyone know what this is? Sea urchins. Really cool. No, they're not. So I had a kid on my back. Yuri had two of our kids on his back at this point. The rest of the crew each had a kid on their back. My brother-in-law had a kid on our back. We had a couple older kids who were trying to make it through it. We had a kid who had a panic attack in the middle of the coral. This was drama in the moment. And then there was nothing worse, though, than like, you've got a kid on your back. You kind of go like this to grab, and then you're like, oh, that hurt. And you take out your hand, and you had like sea urchins just like in all of your fingers. Like nothing deadly, but just one more fun obstacle. Now, as I said, the boat did erupt. Fortunately, and I said, this was Unsinkable. So many things actually happened in our favor. Fortunately, it was a diesel boat. So a gas boat would have exploded probably before we even got off of it, is what I've learned since. But it was a diesel boat, so it waited so conveniently until we hit shore. Now, once we got past the coral, we weren't necessarily at some resort. We were in the middle of the ocean in some deserted area. And we continued to walk, and there's a lot more in that LinkedIn post that you can read about some of the funny stories that happened along that walk, including this gorgeous woman, I gotta tell you, and I try not to be inappropriate, but my wife describes it the same way, that came out of nowhere, in what I can only describe as the front cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit. My brother-in-law and I look at each other and we're like, did we just fucking die? Like, what is going on here? This makes no sense. And the only reason that she was there was she was hooking up with some guy just up the beach. It was a deserted beach. They found a path to drive down. No one comes down here. And these two were there, and she just hadn't gotten fully dressed yet. Anyways, this guy ended up being ex-military. Amazing guy. And this was a quote that he said to me in the moment. If you survive the day, it's an experience tomorrow. And it was so profound, even though this guy was high off his ass, right? We piled the kids into his car. It smelled like marijuana. There was a joint still half smoked. It was quite the experience. But this was our customer experience. This is what we were taking away in the moment. And in the moment, we were in shock, and we were getting through this, and it was quite a story to be told now. But I've been able to reflect since, and I'm able to look back on these 3 lifesavers that we had. And it was things that surrounded us, things that comforted us. And I summarize them as this idea of a brand promised, the trust, and ultimately the engagement that happened around us. And that to me has become this model that I think about when I think about the type of customer experiences that all of us have to obsess over. Let me tell you exactly what I mean. We're going to stay with this story just for a moment here. Someone said that they'd been to Costa Rica back there. You know what does anyone know what Pura Vida means? Sorry? Pure life. It's actually pure life or simple life. So you're both right. It's all good. Don't worry. No bad answers here. But it's this way of life. It's the only way to describe it. In Costa Rica, there's this Pura Vida way of life. I guarantee if this happened in Disney World, my wife would tell me I told you so. We should never go to Disney World. There's something about the way you were surrounded in Costa Rica and the way they approach problems that just created this assurance that we are going to get through this. Their brand promise was a Pura Vida experience, and we had that in every single way. Now, another part I want to talk about is trust. And, we had, I'm not going to say like we learned to trust. We had no choice but to learn to trust our crew within moments, right? I mean, these were people who, as much as this is traumatic for us, this was their livelihood, literally blowing up in the middle of the ocean and sinking to the bottom. In fact, after they got us to shore, like to the coral, and we were waiting, two of them went back, not to try and save the boat, that was beyond, to save their fishing rods so that they could actually eat dinner that night, right? So the trust that developed so quickly with us and with Yuri and everything around us was so amazing. It was really something. When we reunited with Yuri a couple days later, biggest hugs of someone who I never thought I'd have that type of bond with. The last part that I hit on there is this idea of engagement. And the reality is, it wasn't just Yuri and his crew. It was everything around us that brought us in and hugged us in one way or another to take care of us. It was really something special. Getting back to the hotel, we stayed at this amazing small hotel. They took care of us like they were our parents, literally helping us pull sea urchin pins out of our fingers, taking care of our kids, getting them a meal, all these little things that weren't part of the typical experience. A funny story to just tell. So as I mentioned, the boat exploded, went to the bottom. Along with the boat were our car keys. So we had to eventually get lifts back, whole other story. It's funny too. But the not so funny part in the moment was we had to go and we had to get new car keys. So we get there and they're like, yeah, you got to fill out this form. And my brother-in-law and I are like, you don't know the day we've had. We are not filling out a form. And we start to tell them what happened. And they're like in shock. And they said, have fun with it. They're like, we have to submit this, but we want you to have fun. So we actually drew in really detailed ways what happened. My brother-in-law, this is my version. My brother-in-law's is much more graphic because he claims that the turtles were getting it on as well. And that's why this all happened. But it's these little things of how people respond around you. It's these three elements to me that really helped surround us in terms of the way of life that was around us, the way people led us to safety, and ultimately how they engaged us. And all of this together, to me, created this unsinkable experience. For some, they may look at this and they may just look at the video in isolation and be like, oh my God, this is a terrible situation. It was amazing. My kids came back telling this story like they are heroes, right? They have the best two truths and a lie out of anyone in the world now, right? So what I thought I would do for the rest of today is take these three lifesavers, these three buoys, if you will, and apply them to other companies that have had to endure adversity in one way or another. Now, the three companies I'm going to walk you through, one you know very well. Very often have to be like, there's this really cool, smaller but big airline when I'm in the US. Anyways, WestJet's a great company, we all know. Spotify, another great company that probably at least 2/3 of you use, I'm going to guess in here. And the last one, a little bit more B2B. So we're going to kind of go everything from B2C, super consumer, down to B2B examples here. So let's jump in. So remember, we're talking adversity, and no businesses have faced more adversity than travel industries in the last number of years. And I think the ones that have prevailed, the ones that we want to return to, are the ones that have responded in ways through this adversity that tells us they're going to provide a great experience. They're going to be there for me no matter what's going on in the world. So let's look at their brand promise. And in fact, I often find that the best way to understand someone's brand promise is to go to their About Us page. I want you to think about all of your websites. When's the last time you went to your About Us page and read it or updated it? That is how people determine what you stand for and who you are as an organization, right? So this is right off of WestJet's About Us page, and they've got some really powerful words. I've highlighted a few of them for you. It's this idea of enriching the lives of everyone in WestJet's world. Nothing about flying. It's about enriching the lives. Now, before I go forward to the next slide, we didn't survive a plane explosion. Like, this is a much more calm story, but WestJet had to get people over a lot of trauma, a lot of fear. One of those fears for a lot of us was, is it safe to fly right now? And they did a great job at this. They checked all those boxes around saying, we have all the COVID protocols figured out. In fact, they were, we know WestJet's big in Canada, but they are not one of the biggest airlines. Yet they were one of the top 20 COVID compliant companies in 2021. So check mark. We now trust this organization. But the part I want to dwell a little bit more here is how they found ways to actually engage people like you, like me. And we're going to do a little storytelling here. But has anyone ever seen this campaign that they do? It is so much fun. The Christmas Miracle campaign. It is so much fun. All right, stay with me if you've seen it before. You may have even seen the campaign that I'm going to highlight. But they've actually been doing this for 10 years. For 10 years, every Christmas they go out and they do this whole campaign, but it really centers around a video where they story tell tied to what's going on in the world in that moment. And when I saw the video that they did for 2021, 2022, so just in December of this past year, I was so touched, right? It really leaned in on what's on all of our minds, more than I think any of the other 10 prior ones that they've done. And they've done some really emotional pieces on the Fort McMurray fires, all sorts of different things. They have fun ones. You may have seen the video there where a whole bunch of people kind of pop out of the gate on Christmas Eve to entertain people because they're stuck in an airport on Christmas Eve. I mean, nothing could be worse than that, right? They made it a great experience in those moments. But what I want to do is kind of, I want to, get you all to pretend you're in a seat. You can imagine you're in first class. You got a little extra room here. And I'm going to play this video. Now, full disclosure, this is a 4-minute and 58-second video. I'm not going to play the whole thing, right? Even though they gave me like 2 hours, right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm only going to play little clips of the video, but I want you to go on this journey the way they took their customers on this journey. So let's play the first little bit.
Last year was hard for us all, coast to coast. So disguised as a film crew, WestJet asked, what did you miss the most?
Last Christmas, what did you miss most? Getting together with our family.
All my family live in Paris, so it has been like surreal without Christmas, without them.
We've been together in Toronto for about 2 years, and our family are back in the UK, so we haven't been able to see them at that time. It's been quite lonely without them.
All right, so I told you it's almost a 5-minute video. I've edited it though. This is about 2 minutes in, if you will. There's very little content I watch for more than a minute these days. And it's hard to keep my attention that long. So I guess the question I've got is, what are they doing so well to engage me and hook me? And one of the first things I think we can learn from this campaign as marketers is this idea of embracing video and the importance of video. I believe my good friend Tyler Lessard actually didn't Tyler present here this week? It's awesome. I love Tyler. You should watch some of his longer videos too. They engage you. But video in general has really climbed in ways that we maybe expected, maybe didn't. I mean, look at the jump. This is some data coming from HubSpot. Look at the jump from 2019 to 2020 in terms of minutes of video being engaged in every single year. Now, part of that is we had nowhere to go but our own homes, but it's transformed the way we rely on content, the type of formats. Now, if you get more into the world of marketing and using content marketing to get someone through a journey, this is also data coming from the same HubSpot report that shows that video is now the most used format of content in any strategy. Honestly, it was like 4 years ago where the ebook was still holding strong up there, right? These long form 20-page documents that we slaved over. But there's been a big shift. And I think that's one of the things that we have to really look at with this campaign is the way they use video to engage us. Let's play a little bit more though.
If you had one wish this Christmas, What would it be?
On which I would love to see that.
For me, it was to go back to Manitoba with my family and have everyone in the same house.
I'm populated far away abroad, and my mom hasn't met my dad again. I wish that my family could be reunited this Christmas.
So despite the fact that this quote says that you should stop interrupting, I'm going to pause it one more moment because I love this quote from Craig at JWT. I think this is what this content is doing. It is talking about what people are interested in. It is engaging them. It's not about all the COVID protocols that they put into place. This is about the realities that all of us are living with. Let's keep it going.
Merry Christmas. And here are 4 round trip tickets to anywhere WestJet flies so you can be reunited with your family. And open the envelope. It's not a joke. It's not a joke. I'm speechless. I haven't been able to afford, return tickets back.
The only reason I'm stopping this time to see if anyone needs one. Carry them all the time now. My wife watched me practice this quite a few times and guys, I see the tears. It's okay. It's all right. Don't feel bad about it. Let's finish it off.
We heard your story. I can't believe you haven't seen your family in over 2 years. That's a lot. We didn't think that was right.
From little England, they flew all the way across the water because there's no greater bond than a mother and daughter.
So that was minute 448 to 458 there, right at the end. I watched this 4 times before I even decided this was going to be part of my presentation. I've seen it 25 times since. All right. Now, what is it about this campaign that is so engaging? Number one, we can all agree on this. I cried like you cried. All right. That helps. Can't do that with all of our marketing, but it helps. Number two, though, and this is getting a little bit more serious, this campaign is leveraging the realities of this world. Google's algorithms and a lot of the search algorithms, they're not just looking at long-form content anymore. They're looking at content like video, transcending into podcasts, all sorts of forms of content are going to be the types of content your audience is looking for, and they're leaning in more than ever on that opportunity. And the last one, maybe my biggest point here, is they did what people cared about in the moment. No different than how I was taken care of in Costa Rica. They understood what was happening, and they leaned in and they talked about what's relevant to people. So you look at this campaign, no different than my experience, and you think about the things that they did to ultimately connect with their audience and create this amazing customer experience. So it's a great story, and it's a great video, a great campaign. Kudos to the WestJet team. But, how do you take this type of strategy and win in a field that might already be won? Because some of you may be in more disruptive fields where you're like, oh, it's not, we don't have the money of a WestJet. How do we break through? What are we going to do? What really matters? How do we climb? So I'm wondering how many of you also kind of get a little nostalgic when I put this up? Do you remember this? All right, this is 10 years ago, not even 10 years ago, to be honest. And this was a campaign that got me to lean into music in ways bigger than HMV could have ever figured out. Right? This got me to care so much and go and start downloading song after song after song. Until I got to the point where I was like, I don't know, is it worth another 99 cents? Technically, it was $1.29 up here because we're in Canada, but I usually do this talk in the US, 99 cents. But Apple was the giant. Everyone used Apple for their music. And it was kind of assumed in that moment that Apple would own music forever and ever and ever. But there were certain things that were not engaging about this experience. Don't get me wrong. I loved all the J-Lo that you may find in here, all the songs that I may have been downloading 10 plus years ago. But I just kept playing them over and over and over. And I kind of get sick of those songs because it wasn't something new. And I had to rationalize in my head, should I really spend more money right now? Does this make sense? It's no different than me thinking should I buy that full album when all I really want is that one song? And that's where Spotify came in. And I know it's hard to imagine, per my slide a couple moments ago, that I'm going to tell you this challenger story and that it's Spotify. But it wasn't very long ago that people were like, oh, this Spotify company's got no chance. How are they going to beat Apple? Are you kidding me? Apple owns music. They developed this device to hold my music in. No one's going to create a better device than that. But that's what Spotify set out to do. Let's go back again to their About Us page, right? Their brand promise. What do they say they're there to do? They're there to unlock the potential of human creativity. They're not creating music. They're unlocking the potential that's already in there. It's really powerful words when you think about what they claim that they can do. So let's talk a little bit more on the trust element and how they get us to trust them so that we can do this. Because we know to unlock that, to do everything Spotify does, we need data. We need to allow them to track us in that moment, right? So I guarantee if every one of you took out your phone right now and downloaded an app, you're going to be greeted with a screen like this the first time you open it. And we do this thing in our moment in like milliseconds, right? It's like, yes, no, right? Like we don't even talk it out loud. We're just like, am I going to trust this company? Can they give me value in exchange for the data that I'm going to provide? Natasha said after this, we're going to talk in one of the segments, in one of the sessions about data privacy. We are willing to share as much data as someone may be willing to take, as long as we feel we're going to get something back in return. So for so many of us, we often go and we click that button up at the top saying, sure, I'm going to allow Spotify to trust, because we say to ourselves, I understand that they're going to build that playlist for me in literally moments. That's pretty exciting. Now, what's really important about that trust that they're able to build with so many of us, is that we've entered a world now where we need to opt in because of all the data privacy concerns that are out there. So just about a year ago, Apple kind of forced all apps to require a new opt-in for data tracking. And a lot of you probably think, well, everyone just says yes. Only 25% of people said, okay, you can track what I'm doing. Now, depending on where I present this, people are like, oh, but our country is so much more trusting. North America, specifically US, only 18% of people are opting into that. So it kind of makes you wonder, how do brands get their audiences to trust you with their data? Because when we have that data, we can do some pretty cool things. We're going to talk about some of those things in a moment here. So this was a report that came from eMarketer. I thought it was pretty interesting. And there's a lot of answers that you'd kind of expect. Like if I asked any of you right now, what determines whether or not you're going to share your data? Some of these would be on the list. The top one, am I going to get something for free? Sure. You can have my info as long as I get it for free. And you can go down this list. But the second one on there is the one that really stood out for me. It's whether or not that app delivers content that's relevant to me. If so, I'm going to pass over that information. No different than Netflix. I promise this wasn't a Netflix talk, right? But we trust Netflix so much because we expect something back in return. We trust Spotify because we expect them to make these playlists for us on the fly. It's this exchange of data for relevance that happens in the moment. Now, some of you are probably sitting here saying, okay, this is really cool, Randy, but we don't have this consumer app like Spotify or Netflix. This is happening on every single website. Let me tell you, this is my own website. I mentioned I'm co-founder of this company called Uberflip. If you go to our website, it looks something like this. And you'll notice at the bottom of any website right now, that pop-up that happens the first time you come there. Can we track you? Yes or no? And we do that same millisecond decision in our mind, right? The same one that we do when we take out our phone, right? Do I trust? Do I not? Am I going to get value? Am I not? And depending on that determines whether we allow them to track cookies or we don't allow them to track cookies. You can see only a third of people are trusting these websites and allowing them to track their engagement. That is really scary as a marketer, because so much of our ability to personalize in the future is going to be based on first-party data. Third-party data is going to be a lot tougher to come by more and more with time. So we need to learn how to get people to trust us on the fly. Because when we create that trust, then we can deliver these personalized experiences. So I'm going to use the word personalized a lot over the next 10 minutes or so. And some of you are probably trying to figure out, what do I actually mean by personalization? And, I talk about this a lot. So we actually went out in 2020, we did this really cool study. We went out and we spoke to 200 marketers, and we asked them a very simple question. We said, what is it that you think of when you say personalization? And before I show you what they said, this is the same question we asked to 200 consumers. We said, what does personalization mean to you? When you expect personalization from a brand, what do you expect them to be able to deliver? Now, number one answer, as you can see, is can they solve the problems that I have as a buyer? The second one is, do you know my company? And the third one is, do you know my industry? I mean, a lot of this is stuff that if you're a marketer, you're trying to merge this into the emails you're sending and the ads you're retargeting with and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But as I told you, we asked the same question to marketers, and this was their answer, that they know the customer's name, they know the customer's company, and they know the industry. Interestingly, two of them were actually a direct connection. But there's a huge disconnect here, which is that they had no focus on actually solving that problem. Like, let's take a step back and look at this and be like, how many emails do you get in your inbox? And you're like, oh my God, it's so cool. How did they know my name? Right? Like 10 years ago, you were like, holy shit, how did they know my name? Now you're like, oh shit, how'd they get my name? Right? Like, it's changed so quickly in such a short span of time in terms of our expectations and what we want when we say personalized. Log into Netflix, they know your name because you told them your name. But what they really know is that they can curate the right videos, movies, TV shows, documentaries based on your interests. My 10-year-old and me get a completely different experience from the same content that lives inside of there. Right? Spotify. I log into Spotify. It's a completely different experience than my 14-year-old son. Thank God. It's completely different. And honestly, when we're in the same car together, it's a real testing point of being a parent. Anyways, this idea of trust is something that I think Spotify specifically built so well. And they had to find this element of getting you to trust them to give you that data. What's really interesting, and I'm going to point to a report. This one's a little older now. This is 2018, but I think it's so interesting in terms of what was happening. So Mary Merker is this analyst that does some really interesting research on the future of technology, the future of the internet, things like that. And in 2018, she was studying Spotify. And this is really interesting. I don't know how well, I know the screen's a little smaller, but what's being shown on the screen here is over a 3 or 4 year period, the number of unique artists that people were listening to each year. So the idea is back in 2014, when they were logging in, they were consuming, I think it's 68 unique artists. And over a 3 year period, that went to 112. I went back and I looked at all the Grammy winners for those 3 years. There's not that much good music. I assure you, this isn't oh my God, we hit a new genre and everyone's tuning in. This was simply that Spotify was there saying, we are going to introduce you to things that you didn't even know you wanted. You didn't even know mattered to you, but they will matter to you because we know you and we know your behaviors, we know your habits, and in turn, we will make you our most engaged users. In the same period, their engagement went up considerably. And it was a correlation of their ability to create a better experience, to great campaigns that they still do today, like this one. I love this one. Anyone get this one at the end of the year? I look forward to this one, right? Yes, nodding your head and raising your hand at the back because we love this. We're like, what did I do this past year? What do they know about me? And what's going to be my next year as a result? It's these very simple words that are baked into Spotify's UI that I absolutely love. Made for you, right? These words made for you are so simple, but they're so nostalgic. When I think about them, it's a little embarrassing, but I think about the many, many hours that it took me to create a mixtape for the girl that I had a crush on when I was 12 years old. I mean, that was hard work. That was first off, you only had 12 songs on each side. You always wanted the last track to be the first track on the next side because you had to rewind and all that. So you only had so much choice and it had to be special. is like, how many mixtapes can you actually make in a week? Spotify, like if every one of us took our phones out right now and opened our Spotify app, we would all have a made for you playlist. Yet it's still really special because we feel like they've made this music for us. Let's be clear. AC/DC is not writing tracks for me, but it almost feels that way. Right? It feels like that track was actually made for me and they know me better than anyone out there. And because of that, they're able to do these campaigns. And the really cool part here, if we click in here, is they start to curate and they nail it every time. This is my 2019 one where they completely fucked it up because they put this traumatizing song in there for me. So it's actually in there. Right? But they generally nail it. And because they nail it, they have become the leader. Right? Remember, we thought Apple would never lose this market. We thought that they had it. They were done. Which device would they come out with next? But Apple focused on the hardware, not on the buyer, not on our preferences and what we wanted. And I think that's what set them up to have this amazing customer experience. All right, we got one more brand I want to walk you through. Do a little trivia leading up to this one. See if you remember who the brand was. So the question for you is, what do you think was the most sought after tech during and amid the pandemic? Right? Now, some of you are probably sitting there being like, it was for sure this thing. Maybe it was until Sex and the City came along, right? Some of you are probably thinking it's this. Honestly, I think it is this personally because my kids still want one of these and I can't find one of them. PS5 now. All right, my kids really want one. Tell me if you know where to get them. No, it was actually this thing. Anyone know what this thing is? This is the 980, the Medtronic 980 ventilator series. This thing is like the shit during the pandemic. Everyone wanted one of these. Kidding aside, this was so crucial. And we remember the news when this came out. This idea that there wasn't enough ventilators out there. And there were only limited vendors who were creating these. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story of Medtronic and how they navigated what was a very tough time for them. Not from a demand gen perspective. Like they had demand. That was not the problem. It was greeting their customers and helping them through really tough times. And that's where, again, their brand promise comes into play. Go to their About Us page and you will be inspired. Right? This idea of inspiring the extraordinary is something that they believe in across all the different segments and products that they have. If you haven't heard of Medtronic before, it's a massive organization. In addition to ventilators, I've used their product. They make insulin pumps. I'm type 1 diabetic, right? They make some amazing products, and it's always about rising to that occasion and greeting customers in ways that matter. Now, as I kind of lined up already, it was really hard to develop based on the needs in the market. And they did some really cool things to build trust. One of them that I thought was really cool, regardless of your feelings of Elon Musk and Twitter, etc. Right? This isn't a social media talk. They went and they partnered with Musk to go and build these parts that they needed through the SpaceX division. And just in those moments, and I remember seeing a number of stories like this, I started to have more respect for these companies because it wasn't about revenue. It wasn't about pride. It was about what customers needed. And as cool as this example is, don't get me wrong, like this was collaboration. That's maybe the toughest thing to do. But I'd say one even tougher, if you are in the healthcare space, is giving up data from your patents. What Medtronic did, which is so cool, is they actually released all of their IP so that startups, inventors, academic institutions could go develop ways to bring their ventilators to market and to use them in progressive ways that they couldn't get to in these moments. It was really cool, really motivating use case from a company in the healthcare space, which is usually got to be so much more guarded and so much more slow to move. They said, no, it's okay. We are going to engage with not just our customers, we're going to engage with our ecosystem in ways that we've never done before. It was amazing. Now, another thing, and this gets into some of the challenges that they had. I'm going to paint for you, this is actually pre-COVID. So when you sell a ventilator, which I only full disclosure, Medtronic's a customer of ours at Uberflip. That's why I know this story so well. They've got an amazing marketing team who I've gotten to know over the last few years, even more so. And they told me about how they used to service a ventilator pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, what they would do is, the reality is a lot of the nurse practitioners inside the hospitals that they would sell these into, they actually didn't know how to use the product so well because they weren't used that often. Like a ventilator kind of sat there, used from time to time, not a lot of demand for it. So they had these field reps, kind of like that person who's in the store stocking Coca-Cola when you go to the grocery store, right? On behalf, but they were really technical people who could go in there and stand side by side with a nurse or a doctor and guide them on how to use the products that they had already purchased, right? Really cool, really effective way to sell and support your customers, to engage your customers. Well, until this happened, right? Overnight, now we need your help more than ever, but sorry, you can't come in the doors. Literally not allowed in the doors. And we know this, like, even if you had a family member in the hospital, you could not enter the family to visit your family. Couldn't enter those doors. And these people who were so crucial to making sure ventilators could be supported, they needed to be there and they weren't allowed in. And it made sense why they couldn't be there, but it was infuriating for everyone involved. I want to take a second from this story and just take a step back and talk about content and personalization, which we were hitting on before. There's some stats that come from Adobe. I think they're really dead on. 42% of buyers are annoyed when content isn't personalized. Makes sense. I get annoyed when my kids have used my Netflix. I am really annoyed. Right? They start screwing up that algorithm. This is bullshit. Right? In fact, almost, or actually 2/3, if you do the math there, say that they just won't buy again. They won't come back to that vendor in any sort of way. Now, these examples from Adobe are more consumer-based examples, but I want you to use this frustration and think about how these nurses felt. Think about that feeling of saying, oh my God, how in the world am I going to figure out how this thing's going to work? What am I going to do to actually solve for these dying patients in front of me who need this system and I don't even know how to use it? Now, they did something amazing, but I want to take a step back here and I want to think about this from a more global marketing perspective on some of the things that we do where we just fail to engage in meaningful ways. And a lot of that has to do with ignoring engagement, okay? Now, I'm going to set up the scene of a typical go-to-market, though. And, this is probably in a more considered purchase, be it B2C or B2B, one where we really need to understand our buyers like Medtronic had to do. So the first thing that all of us do as marketers these days is we invest big dollars into data. And this isn't a problem. This is a good thing. We're investing in understanding who our buyers are. We're using things like a CRM, marketing automation platform, customer data platform, CDP, a lot of great solutions out there to really understand a 360 view of our customer. Great, check mark. Then we go on to the next step. Once we know the customers, we know how to find them. We know how to greet them. We know how to attract them, how to pull them in. When we do this, regardless of what channel you believe in or you're responsible for here, we're using a mix of different channels to simply grab the attention. I don't consider this personal engagement. I consider this attraction. How do I pull someone in? How do I stop them from what they're doing? Whether I'm sending an ad, an email from my Marketo instance, whether I'm using my sales team to send out an email cadence, whatever it might be, even a social media tweet or post, all these things are to grab the attention. But then there's this moment where we do one thing. And if you look at all of these channels, I know it's a little small here, but the one thing that is in common is they all have a pink button or pink link. Because every attract channel we do asks our buyers to take action, to go to that next step, to click here, right? The meat of the tweet is not the 140 characters. It's the URL that we want to use to get them off of Twitter and get them onto our website. But too often, that's the part where this slide turns into a sinking ship because we spend so much money, but we don't think enough about how we actually get someone to engage with us. So what I want to paint for you is what that means for a buyer. And I'm trying to be somewhat clever here. There's a Gartner stat out there that says that it takes 11, technically 11.2 pieces of content before someone's ready to buy from us. 11.2. So the 11 pink that's 11 pink boxes, by the way. Those are the pieces of content we need to get them to. We often end up with a whole bunch of other content that doesn't matter, but there's 11 pieces that matter, and we got to get them there. So what do we do as marketers? We say, okay, great, no problem. I'm going to run some sort of SEM campaign. I'm going to pull people in. And I know they may find another asset, and if they don't get to the one that matters, that's okay, because I'll send an email next, right? And after that, I'm going to send another campaign and another campaign and another, and eventually, fingers crossed, that our competitors don't swoop in. They're going to buy from us at the very end. There's a lot of problems with this slide. Think about this from the buyer perspective. That's a lot of times that you've got to come back until you're going to be ready to buy and ready to talk to sales. But the other part is think about what this costs you. Every one of these channels is a point where you are engaging people and spending money to bring them over. Yet we fail to keep them in their seat. What buyers want is really not different than what you want. You want to pull them in with whatever campaign that is and let them kind of find their way through all that great content. Right? Think that Netflix example that I told you I wouldn't talk about. Right? But like as soon as I'm done watching that show, 3, 2, before I can even change it, oh my God, that sounds great too. Let's just spend the rest of the weekend on our couch. Right? That's what we have to do, and that's what we have to emulate as marketers. So let's kind of use this and think about how do we ultimately take this and think about engaging our buyers at true scale. So I want to show you a framework that I've worked on for a number of years. I often have to put the word simple in there because you're going to look at this and be like, it's not that brilliant, Randy. Like it's designed to be simple because we need to be simple in how we go to market, right? And I already kind of gave you a glimpse of this. The first step is we need to identify the buyers that are going to buy from us with data. The second piece is attract them with the right channels. And the third one is engage them with the right destinations. Different language for this in your world may be something like this. Which accounts should buy from us? How do I grab their attention? And where do I send them when they're ready to click? Right? Now, I've worked on this framework for years, and I've talked to so many marketers, and we've done a whole series of great interviews with marketers on how they execute with this. These 3 buckets, and then often it's really interesting to layer in some of the technology that they may use, right? This is just a sample of technology. You'll notice my logo's in one of the buckets, but by no means do we solve all at my company, nor do some of the partners that I get to work with solve all. It's how these things work together, layered on top of strategy, layered on top of people, that allows us to go to market. But I want to come back to where we have this gap. We did this really cool study late 2021, so not too long ago, like 6 months ago, 7 months ago now. And we went out and we asked marketers their confidence in each of these buckets. How confident you are that you can nail it. So the first data point that Forrester understood was 74% of people feel that they can understand who are the right accounts to buy from, which is starting to make more sense. I mean, this number was a lot lower 5 years ago, but solutions in the marketplace like the 6 Senses of the world, if you've heard of these companies, Demand Base, the CDP solutions like Segment by Twilio, these have all made it possible for us to get a better picture of who our buyers are, right? So 74% is pretty good. The next one, 63, pretty good, almost 2/3. Like, I don't actually buy this because no marketer can prove channel ROI, but good for them that they think they've got it, right? 63% say they can find the right channels to engage their audience. Remember, this is Forrester data. We didn't manipulate it. We didn't go to our customers. Only 11% of them felt that they can actually keep someone engaged on their website. That's how we frame the question. Can you keep someone engaged when you have them on your website? We are spending so much money on those first 2 buckets with so little confidence at the end. But this isn't impossible. We can build some really cool things today. This is like a canvas that I built out that is kind of like your typical campaign that you can go and create today, right? So on the far left is that data, the identify. The middle is a typical channel. I'm using an ad here. You could put anything from ad to email, social post, whatnot. And the last piece is a landing page, if you will, a page where content and offerings will be living. Now, what's possible when you use that data, something like the name, is we can fill it in and be like, hey, Dan, we know who you are. Remember, that was cool 10 years ago. Now Dan knows how this works, right? We can also do other cool things. We can drop in the title. We can drop in the company name. The industry starts to give it a little bit more context because now we put some imagery in the background to show that, like, we kind of know who you are. We can speak to you. But the real part that shows that you can build a relationship with this buyer, that you can engage them, this thing is really in my way, is the ability to say, I'm going to surface the right content. I'm going to put content that matters to you. No different than Netflix. No different than that idea that I'm going to say that these are the assets that you care about. Netflix has tens of thousands of shows, but we only see like 10 of them when we log in. You may have tens of thousands of blog posts and ebooks and videos pulsing through your large organizations, but most of your buyers only need 11.2 of them, right? How do you surface that? How do you use data to personalize? All these blue highlighted areas are things that we can personalize on the fly if we bring these systems together, if we bring these strategies together. It's pretty cool. So I want to take you back now to our friends at Medtronic. I remember they were like, shit, we can't send any of our people into the hospital. What are we going to do? Well, many of us were embracing this term work from home, right, over the last few years. They took a different acronym, EFH, educate from home. We are going to educate our customers right from our homes, like we were standing side by side them inside the hospital. So what they managed to do, using this framework that I showed you, this was the technology they used. I'm not going to dig too much into tech today, but these are some of the pieces that they managed to use. So with solutions like Demandbase and their CRM being Salesforce, they were able to understand different hospitals have these products, right? This hospital has purchased this specific ventilator from us and has this, this many models and all these different details and these specs, and let's use that. So then I said, great, we're going to use our email automation platform, Eloqua, part of Oracle in their case, and we're going to send out emails to each of these hospitals. But what was cool about them is when you actually clicked on that link, remember, every one of these attract channels has a link. You were sent to a page that had content curated based on who you were. They used the data inside of Salesforce and Eloqua and Demandbase to understand what products. So I don't know how well you'll be able to see this. This is another instance. Not only did they show the right SKUs, if you clicked on this button, I don't know if you can see, there's like a little circle. You were actually connected with that rep who would have come into your hospital. Instead of having to call and get dialed through a whole bunch of numbers, immediate connection to the people who would typically be there to support you. They created an experience, and through that, they were able to define this idea of what they promised as a brand, the trust that they continued to say that they would have to inspire people and engage them. And it was really motivating to hear this story. The marketer there's name's Anne. She's fantastic. And, it reminds me, and I told you I wouldn't talk about Netflix, but how do we not, right? I'm always guilty. But, it reminds me of data points, right? Accenture did this data point that said 83% of us are willing to provide our data for something that's personalized. Who here has a Google Home device or Alexa device at home? Right? Why? Because you want things that are personalized to you. It's maybe the biggest invasion into our house ever. You might as well have one of their employees sitting in your house taking notes. No one would do that. But it's because we believe that we're going to get all this great value in return. So every time I think about that image, it comes up all the time. It's like Bloodline Show is haunting me. It reminds me of my experience. It reminds me of another quote. I absolutely love this quote. Anyone know this quote? It's from Walt Disney. Do what you do so well that they will want to see it again and bring their friends. Disney creates the most amazing experiences, in my opinion, even though my wife hates it. But what reminded me, what's so super cool about that, I told you my story of going to Costa Rica. We did fly in WestJet. But just a year later, we booked to go back. Despite being on this boat that exploded, despite nearly dying, despite our trip really being a little less than what we expected, we booked to go back and we brought our friends, right? That was the amazing part of this, is that they were able to create an experience for us that brought us back. So I'll leave you with that. Well, actually, I'll leave you on with one last tip. If you ever jump off a boat, you can make shoes out of anything. All right, this was my shirt, Made 3 pairs of shoes from it, all right? But it's what we do and what we create as marketers that create the experiences that happen for those around us. And I hope that's the takeaway that y'all have from this. Thanks so much for listening.
Anyone have any questions for Randy before he wraps up?
Yeah, Andrew.
This is going to be a bit of a strange question. I say in advance. So in the case of Medtronic,
Yep.
not to get dark or maudlin, but given the ventilators were often associated with just making people comfortable before they passed, I'm wondering if that had any, I won't say backlash, but like, was there some sort of umbrella effect on their brand, or was that a concern of Anne and the marketing team? Or how did they potentially combat that, or distance themselves from the association of it? I guess is a better way of putting it.
It's a great question, and I'll be honest, I don't know 100%, but I think you raise a really good point, which is how do we distance our brand sometimes from the good or the bad of the association? I mean, many of us think of Pfizer as nothing more than a COVID vaccine supplier now. AstraZeneca, maybe even worse in some ways along that same path. So I think we have to be very careful in times of immense attention to ensure that people focus on what we are there to do and how we have these diverse products and everything around that. Again, I don't know the answer. Be an interesting question to ask Anne and her team there. But I think that comes back to this idea of having a brand promise. And I said it earlier, how often do you go to your About Us page and look at what you claim there? I think it's such an important part of our website because so many people go there. They go there if they're looking for a job, if they've just heard about this company, because sometimes our website homepage is there to get someone to purchase versus understand what this company does. So, I think it's something we got to definitely be careful of. I think it's a great point. Any other questions? All right. The only other question I sometimes get was, what was the hotel that took such good care of you? It's called the Milano Resort. Anyways, thanks so much.